about those few moments and whether who's on top of who and the right of self-defense, and whether or not the prosecution proved that George Zimmerman had hatred, ill will towards Trayvon Martin so bad, so evil, to justify a second-degree murder conviction and say that he had no self-defense available to him. And I think the prosecution failed to meet their burden of proof.
And don't we already know that Trayvon was on top of George Zimmerman, Bob? So now we have these conflicting reports. Kimberly mentioned this goes to the credibility of the witnesses that we've heard from, namely Trayvon's parents. What do you think of this 911 call that more people seem to be saying was the voice of Trayvon Martin?
I don't know how anybody can tell what voice that was. And by the way, those people they brought in there to say it was his best friend. That guy was a wuss on the stand who started to cry. Was somebody who was close. They're all close to Zimmerman. Of course they're going to bring him up to say. Of course they're going to say it was his voice. The fact still remains that Zimmerman was not being threatened. He had a couple of scratches in his back and a broken nose, and he took out a gun and killed a kid.
But if that was Zimmerman on the tape, Eric, he sounds like he's
Let me push
needed
back
some
on you,
help.
Bob, here. That last guy was the star witness, originally was a star witness for the prosecution. He became the star witness for the defense, basically saying, when we asked Trayvon's father if that was Trayvon's voice on the tape, and he said, I'm not sure, I don't know. Now he's sure. Look, the bottom line, there's a burden of proof by the prosecution. As Kimberly points out, she doesn't believe they've met that burden of proof. Dan Abrams, you know, the well-respected legal analyst for ABC, says, you know what, he would be very surprised if they got a guilty verdict.
Well, they could get a homicide victim. Look, this guy had already been profiling black kids in that neighborhood. There's been a record of that. The guy was a wannabe cop who didn't like black people.
No, that's an inaccurate statement.
It is not an inaccurate statement.
There is no record of him profiling black kids in the neighborhood.
He called in black kids.
No, he was a community organizer, essentially, patrolling that area.
He's a wannabe cop that shouldn't have had a gun.
Excuse me, Bob, doing a neighborhood watch that he was signed up to do. So whoever comes in the area, if they act suspicious, regardless of color, you would consider that person if they were acting unusually in that area, especially because of the number of burglaries.
I don't blame Bob's attitude for this, because this is the attitude that's been projected by the media for a year. There are 13,000 homicides. Why did the media focus on this one? Because it reflected a view of America that they wanted America to experience, that essentially America is nothing but a racist country, and this happens all over the place. But statistically, this case is an oddity. This doesn't happen. This is a rarity. If you look at the way crimes are committed, it's way different. The real victim is the real verdict is that the media is guilty of falsely smearing America, which led then to violent backlashes across the country. There were like 4 or 5 different backlash crimes based on this. If the press actually really did care about the 2 elements of this case, which was race and handguns, they should focus on gang warfare, which has more than enough of that going on. But they don't look at that because that's not indicative of an endemic white American race problem.
But those gangs all have guns.
Yeah, what I'm saying is, but it's not indicative of white American racism. So they ignore it.
Can we stay on this for a second? Go ahead.
We have a real quick update. Just moments ago in the courtroom, the judge did rule, and this went against a previous ruling by Judge Nelson, so it's a ruling for the defense, that evidence that Trayvon Martin had marijuana in his system at the time of this, altercation and ultimately his death.
Not sure.
That makes this case even better.
Can I point out, we've been saying this, I've been saying it here, that the real surprise in the case is that for a year, the media had their verdict. They had a guilty verdict for George Zimmerman. They had probably at least a second-degree, but if it went up the media, it was a first-degree murder charge and signed, sealed, and delivered. And the surprise here, and why it's so compelling now, is you're waiting for that evidence to show up, and it just hasn't shown up.
Because it was tried in the court of public opinion for months. The good news, though, again, is that, Kimberly, the court of public opinion does not matter. These juries only are hearing what's in front of them. And it strikes me that every time this investigator, Chris Siriano, takes the stand, he always seems to blow the prosecution's argument out of the water. Last week he took the stand and he basically said that Zimmerman wasn't a liar. Now he's creating questions around Trayvon's parents, I should say, about whose voice was on the 911 call.
Right.
Kimberly, I want to ask you about what Dan Abrams said as well. Eric brought that up. Abrams on ABC News today basically said this case is over with, done. They're not getting murder 2 and they're not getting manslaughter. What do you think? Is this done?
Well, based on the facts, the evidence that had been presented presented to the jury, which before we had speculation. That's why everyone was making an opinion about what was going to happen or what went on that night. Now we know the evidence is in, prosecution has rested, and I don't see how there's any way they're going to be able to arrive at a second degree, let alone a manslaughter, because they have failed to prove the requisite level of intent on the part of George Zimmerman.
If this guy was stoned on marijuana, if people were stoned on marijuana are not all that aggressive. I mean, if that's even a better case as far as I'm concerned. Why are you guys going in the tank for Zimmerman? What is it?
Wait a second. Wait, Bob. I've sat here and heard you talk about the incredible power of modern marijuana, that it drives people crazy. You've said that.
No, it drives them stoned crazy.
Yes.
Now, I just don't think people who are stoned on that kind of good dope are going to take out.
You don't even know how much he had, Bob. Yeah. How much was in his system? What kind of marijuana he was taking? So I don't understand how.
By the way,
you can hang
I'm not in
your
the
hat
tank
on
for
this.
anybody here.
And
I just